There is a question I want you to sit with for a moment before we start. When did staying out of debt become something that required a strategy? Not a rhetorical question, a real one. Because for most of human history, and for most of the 20th century in this country, staying out of debt was not a strategy. It was the default. It was the baseline condition of a household managed correctly. Debt was the exception, the emergency, the last resort when everything else had failed and the alternative was worse than the cost of borrowing. Somewhere between then and now, that flipped. Debt became normal. Carrying a balance became standard. The credit card became the operating account. The minimum payment became a monthly budget line, as fixed and expected as the utility bill. And the idea that a household, particularly a household on a fixed income, living alone, with a check that arrives on a schedule and stops at a ceiling, could operate month after month, year after year, without accumulating debt began to seem not like a reasonable expectation, but like an ambitious goal. The seniors I hear from in the comments of these videos describe this shift with a specific kind of bewilderment. They remember when it wasn't like this. When the household they grew up in didn't carry balances. When the month ended with something remaining rather than with a calculation about what could wait until next month. When the relationship with money was fundamentally different, not because there was more of it, but because there was a system for managing it that made the money behave differently than money behaves when there is no system at all. That system is what we abandoned, not a tip, not a trick, not a life hack. A complete, coherent, integrated operating method for running a household on limited income without accumulating debt, built over decades by people who didn't have the option of borrowing their way through a difficult month and who therefore built something that didn't require borrowing. We abandoned it so completely that most people living on fixed incomes today have never encountered it as a coherent whole. They've heard pieces of it, seen fragments referenced in financial advice. But the system, the complete, connected, this is how the whole thing works system, has been largely lost. Today, it comes back. All of it. The philosophy that built it, and the specific mechanics of how it ran. The philosophy that built the system, and why it's different from everything being taught today. Before the mechanics, the philosophy, because the mechanics without the philosophy are tools without a reason to use them. And the reason to use them, the understanding that made the previous generation reach for these tools automatically without being told, is the part that was lost first. The philosophy was not complicated. It was not sophisticated. It could be stated in a single sentence that the previous generation would have recognized immediately and that most modern financial education has quietly walked away from. You do not spend money you do not have. Not as a guideline, not as an aspiration, as an absolute, as the organizing principle around which every other financial decision was made, as the line that was not crossed regardless of what the credit card limit said was available, regardless of what the buy now pay later offer suggested was possible, regardless of what the payment plan made feel manageable in the moment. You do not spend money you do not have. The modern financial system is built at every level on the proposition that this principle is outdated, that credit is a tool to be used strategically, that carrying a balance is the cost of convenience, that debt, managed correctly, is a normal feature of an adult financial life, that the household without a credit card balance is not financially sophisticated. It is financially underserved, missing out on the rewards and the flexibility and the modern financial participation that credit provides. This proposition serves the financial industry extremely well. It serves the households that accept it considerably less well, particularly the households on fixed incomes, where the interest on a carried balance doesn't just cost money. It costs a percentage of an income that doesn't grow, compounding month after month, until the minimum payment is a fixture of the budget and the balance behind it is a permanent condition rather than a temporary situation. The previous generation's philosophy was not unsophisticated. It was the result of watching what happened to households that abandoned it, watching the balance grow, watching the minimum payment eat into a fixed income, watching the small financial crisis that would have been manageable without debt become an insurmountable problem with it. They had seen the trajectory, and they built a system designed to ensure they never got on it. That system started with the philosophy, and the philosophy started with the refusal to spend what wasn't there. Everything else in this video is built on that refusal. The first pillar, the paper. Why they wrote it down. Before money moved. The first mechanical component of the system was so simple that describing it requires resisting the urge to add complexity that wasn't there. They wrote down what was coming in and what was going out before the money moved. On paper, with a pencil. At the beginning of every month, before anything was spent, every dollar that was expected to arrive was listed, and every dollar that was expected to leave was assigned a destination. Income at the top. Every source, Social Security, any pension, any other regular payment. The exact amount, not an approximation. The actual number that would arrive in the account. Below that, the fixed obligations, rent or mortgage, utilities at their estimated monthly cost, insurance premiums, phone, any other recurring payment that didn't vary and couldn't be deferred. These came off the income total first. Before anything else. Before grocery money. Before personal spending. Before any optional category. The fixed obligations were the non-negotiables, and they got assigned first. What remained after the fixed obligations was the operating budget. The money available for everything else, groceries, household supplies, personal spending, and whatever other categories the household required. This remainder got divided into specific amounts for each category, not approximate amounts. Specific ones: the grocery budget for this month, the household supplies budget, the personal spending budget, the miscellaneous category for small, irregular expenses that didn't fit neatly elsewhere. When every category was assigned and the totals added up, something happened that no budgeting app has ever quite replicated. The money was spoken for. Every dollar had a name. Every anticipated expense had a source. And, critically, if the assignments didn't add up, if the categories required more than the income provided, the problem was visible right there on the paper before a single dollar had moved. Not discovered at the end of the month when the damage was done. Visible at the beginning, when adjustments could still be made. This visibility, the complete, on paper, before-the-fact picture of the month's finances, is the foundation the system rested on. Without it, the envelopes and the rotation habits and the repair discipline are operating in the dark. With it, they are executing a plan made with full information in a calm moment rather than responding to pressures in difficult ones. The paper didn't need a subscription. It didn't need a passcode. It didn't need a software update, or a synced account, or a connection to anything. It needed a pencil and 15 minutes at the beginning of the month, and the discipline to do it before the spending started rather than after. That discipline was the first pillar, and it held everything else up. After the paper plan was set, cash for variable categories, groceries, household supplies, personal spending, was withdrawn and divided into labeled envelopes, each holding exactly what the budget assigned. When an envelope was empty, that category was done. No borrowing from next month, no charging the difference. This was the system's most powerful feature, and it worked because physical cash creates real friction. when the envelope holds $40 and the total comes to $46. Something visible has to give. Another envelope goes short, or an item goes back on the belt. That discomfort wasn't a flaw. It was the mechanism. The financial industry has spent decades removing exactly this kind of friction because a wider gap between spending and consequence produces more spending, and more spending produces more revenue for whoever is processing the transaction. The envelope system restored that gap deliberately, making the cost of a purchase something felt in the moment rather than discovered on a statement weeks later. There's a physical, almost sensory dimension to this that's easy to underestimate until it's experienced directly. Handing over bills and watching an envelope get visibly thinner is not the same information as watching a number on a screen tick down. The weight of cash, the visible thickness of what's left, the simple act of counting it out at the register, all of this supplies a kind of real-time feedback that a tap or a swipe never will, no matter how detailed the receipt is afterward. That feedback isn't nostalgia for a simpler time. It's data, delivered in a form the brain actually registers as a loss in the moment it happens, rather than as an abstraction to be reconciled later. Pillar 3. Fixed obligations first. The order of funding was never negotiable. Rent, utilities, insurance, filled before a single dollar reached groceries or personal spending. This seems obvious stated plainly, yet it's violated constantly in households without an explicit rule for it, simply because a debit card doesn't distinguish between discretionary and obligatory spending. Without a designated order, a month can start with no plan and end with the question of whether the utility payment can wait another week. If income fell short of covering everything, the shortage always landed on discretionary categories, never on the obligations that produce late fees, shutoffs, or eviction notices when missed. Groceries got trimmed before rent was ever at risk. This wasn't framed as financial discipline, it was simply the order things happened in. Necessities before preferences, always, and it's what protected households from the specific failure mode that turns a tight month into a genuine crisis. It's worth being precise about what this rule actually prevents, because the failure mode it guards against isn't dramatic until it is. A household that funds discretionary spending first, on the assumption that the fixed obligations will somehow get covered later, is a household one bad week away from choosing between the electric bill and the rent. A household that funds obligations first has already made that choice before the week arrives, and made it when there was no pressure attached to the decision. The rule removes a choice that shouldn't have to be made under stress by making it automatically, every month, before stress has a chance to enter into it. Pillar 4. The rollover rule. Money left in an envelope at month's end didn't become free spending money. It rolled forward, either into next month's version of the same category or into a designated reserve for irregular costs, car registration, insurance premiums, unexpected repairs. This reserve, built quietly from unspent surplus, smoothed out the volatility of living paycheck to paycheck, so no single month had to balance perfectly on its own. The name for this reserve varied from household to household: the contingency fund, the just-in-case money, the reserve. But the function was identical everywhere it was practiced. It was the accumulated discipline of every month that came in slightly under budget, captured rather than absorbed back into ordinary spending. A better month didn't mean a treat purchased with the difference. It meant a slightly larger cushion for the month that would inevitably run tight. Over a year, that cushion grew large enough to absorb the kind of expense that would otherwise have forced a choice between two bills, or a first charge on a credit card that had, until then, gone unused. Pillar 5. The expense calendar annual and irregular costs don't fit a monthly budget cycle, so the previous generation used an actual calendar. At the start of the year, every anticipated non-monthly expense, car registration, insurance renewals, property taxes, seasonal costs, was listed with an approximate amount and due month. The total was divided by 12, and that monthly figure was set aside in the reserve as a fixed obligation, same as rent. The result: no annual bill ever arrived as a surprise. The registration due in September, the insurance renewal in March. These were scheduled and funded months in advance, not discovered at the worst possible moment, competing with the heating bill or a season that had already drained whatever buffer existed. This was treated as basic household competence, not an advanced technique, something everyone was simply expected to know, taught in passing the way any other household task was taught, and rarely explained at length because it rarely needed to be. What the expense calendar eliminated wasn't the big, unpredictable emergency. Those still happened, and still had to be handled as they came. What it eliminated was the entirely predictable expense that gets treated like an emergency anyway, simply because nobody wrote it down in January. A car registration is not a surprise. A property tax bill arriving on the same date it arrives every single year is not a surprise. Treating them as surprises and reaching for a credit card or a payment plan each time is a choice, one the expense calendar made unnecessary by doing the anticipation months ahead of time, a little at a time, instead of all at once under pressure. Pillar 6. The repair discipline. Owned assets were maintained, not casually replaced. A lamp fixed for a few dollars in parts is a lamp that doesn't cost $60 to replace. A chair reglued and tightened is a chair that doesn't cost $150 to replace. A coat with a new button doesn't need replacing at $80. Individually, these savings look small. Across a household and a year, the gap between a repair habit and a replacement habit is the difference between a budget that absorbs normal wear and tear without disruption and one that's regularly blown up by it. This wasn't sentimentality. It was arithmetic, applied consistently. Repairing something also means understanding it, how it fails, what corrects the failure, how to maintain it going forward. That understanding produces a different relationship with possessions than the replacement habit ever does, and it's part of why the whole system held together. The money side and the household side reinforcing each other rather than working against each other. A household running the repair discipline wasn't just spending less, it was also, gradually, becoming more capable, more able to diagnose a problem, more willing to attempt a fix before assuming replacement was the only option, more confident handling the ordinary mechanical failures that every home eventually produces. Pillar 7. The debt wall. One rule operated as an absolute: no debt for ordinary living expenses. Mortgages, necessary vehicle loans, and genuine emergencies were legitimate uses of credit. Groceries, utilities, and everyday spending were not. Those came from income, always, without the rationalization that this month is unusual, or I'll pay it back once things ease up. Any credit card in use was paid in full every month. A card paid in full is a convenience. A card carrying a balance is a loan whose interest compounds against a fixed income never designed to absorb it. This wall wasn't experienced as deprivation. It was protection. It's what kept every other pillar functioning, because a system built to spend only what's available collapses the moment credit makes more money appear to exist than actually does. One carried balance is usually how the collapse starts. 1 month, the envelope runs short, and the card covers the difference. 1 month becomes 2. 2 becomes a permanent line on the budget. The previous generation guarded against this not from ideology, but from having watched it happen to people around them, and treated the wall as the single most important rule in the entire system, more important than any of the others, because without it, every other pillar eventually exists just to service the debt the card accumulates. If this gave you something real, a specific thing you're doing differently starting this week, hit the like button and subscribe. Every week, I put out videos like this one for the people who are done managing the consequences of a system that wasn't built for them and are ready to use a system that was. Share this with someone who needs it. Someone who's been carrying a balance for so long it feels permanent. Someone who hasn't had a month end with money left in a longer time than they want to say out loud. Someone who needs to know that the system exists, that it works, and that it's available to them right now. This knowledge was taught once, across kitchen tables, and in the margins of household ledgers, and in the specific way a grandmother filled an envelope and handed it to a daughter and said, "This is the grocery money, and when it's gone,